So what is up, guys? Today I'm going to be doing a very lengthy and in-depth video on the overarching evolution of Destiny's Crucible, aka its PvP element of the game, and how it's kind of changed over its early inceptions from the alpha beta to the game's early launch to when the first DLCs, the Dark Below, House of Wolves, were dropping, up until Taken King's launch, and up until now, and how it's kind of changed over the course of the past 3 years. Believe it or not, it's pretty much been 3 years since Destiny's out. It's been an interesting ride, but for those who've been around since its early inception, everyone will tell you early on assault rifles were king. I mean, they were the dominant go-to weapon. They could literally do everything, and I think that was kind of the problem, was the assault rifles. You would think assault rifles would obviously be excellent weapons for mid to close range, and ironically enough, that's kind of the rotation of the maps we're getting right now. A lot of close to maybe mid-range maps nowadays, but during the beta alpha phase, we got a lot of large maps. We got First Light to play around with, we got Rusted Lands, and we had, I believe, Shores of Time. These were all very, in terms of Destiny maps now, very large, very open maps, and assault rifles very much so shined even on these maps, mainly because they were just dead accurate at distance, and they were doing some crazy damage. As you'll see in this footage, you'll be seeing me hit 49 to the head, 49 crit with an assault rifle. Granted, I have a Sidonia, I believe, with focus fire during this time, and 30 to the body. So, I mean, it was doing some serious damage. It was hitting as hard as a scout rifle, and scout rifles during the alpha beta were also not to be laughed at. A lot of the common weapons which we got, which is all we got really in the alpha and the beta, the scout rifles were three-shotting me. You'll see it in this gameplay a couple times. The scout rifles were no joke either, but in general, assault rifles were king because they could do what scout rifles could do, and they could do what they couldn't do, which is compete at close to mid-range, because they were obviously automatic weapons. But I feel like that's what kind of rubbed people the wrong way a little bit, was the fact that assault rifles were kind of having a little bit too much range. During the alpha beta, it was mainly the Sidonia and the Shingen C or E or whatever it was, and then in the final game we started getting blues, which were like the Galahad E. I think there was another blue Shingen something, and then of course you had the New Monarchy Vendor Assault Rifle, which was incredible, and then you had the Shadow Price, which was phenomenal, and then we go into the Suros Regime. The Suros Regime was considered to be one of the greatest weapons at the time. I mean, it was just unbeatable. Granted, there was a small window when the Vex Mythoclast was literally what I truly believe to be the definition of overpowered. The Vex Mythoclast literally could three-shot you anywhere. We're talking the toes, the leg, the torso, the head. There was really no reason to go for headshots with the Vex Mythoclast because it was three-shotting you no matter what, and there was no damage fall off at the time. So basically, you were getting three-shot cross-map with this very strange weapon that only a handful of people were fortunate enough to get to drop from the Vault of Glass final boss, and it was the Vex Mythoclast. And for those who got to play around with it, it was a glorious time because you pretty much could not be contested. It could literally turn any player into a, at least if you were awful, it could turn you into a decent player, because it was so easy to just absolutely melt people with the Vex Mythoclast. And it was a little bit annoying, but of course Bungie did get on top of that, which kind of just made things business as usual, with the Suros being the dominant weapon of choice. In terms of special weapons, you had a lot of people sniping, even in the beta alpha, and of course in the early game, mainly because I always felt like the headshot hitbox in this game was just absurdly generous. I don't know why. I mean, I took notice of this very early on during the alpha beta. Sniping just looked very easy, and it did feel really easy, mainly because like you were getting shots on targets and you were like, that was a body. Oh wait, it was a headshot? Yeah, that happened a lot, and I think that's kind of one of my main criticisms was Destiny's sniping mechanics, I guess, in general. Just headshots just seem awfully generous at times, to the point where you even question if he even landed the shot, and at that point it just didn't really matter. Shotguns have always, for those who've been around for quite some time, had a place, but they weren't really that prevalent early on. I think one of the standout shotguns early on during the game's launch was the shotgun that dropped from Vault of Glass, the Found Verdict. Now, the Found Verdict was a very special shotgun because it had a very high impact, very good range. I think it had a hand reforge on it, and it was full auto and final round. So a lot of people who like to push at people or rush, you would see them just go ahead in there holding the trigger down with the Found Verdict and just spray down a room, because that's how shotgun kind of worked early on, because you didn't really have the Matador, Party Crasher, Felwinter era just yet, but you saw plenty of shotguns. A lot of people who had Found Verdict were very proud of that weapon because it was a very amazing weapon. And of course, there was Praetor's Revenge, was a very popular sniper that dropped from Vault of Glass. In general, Vault of Glass dropped a lot of amazing weapons. The machine gun was phenomenal. A pulse rifle, I forget what it's called. It was just the Praetor's timepiece, another very solid archetype weapon, which would go on to dominate much later on. But in general, you saw a lot of sniping shotgun. You did see fusion rifle use during this early times of Destiny, and this was mainly because the Plan C could map people from pretty absurd ranges, but not a lot of people had it. But one thing that was very terrifying for those who played during the early days of Destiny was the Pocket Infinity. The Pocket Infinity was a very terrifying weapon to hear in the Crucible, mainly because when you heard that thing charge up, it literally just crapped out laser beams. Like, it shot so fast, so constantly. It was like a stream of laser death at mid-range. Like, it was truly horrifying. Of course, Bungie did eventually nerf it because it was honestly out of control. It was the best exotic special weapon in the game because it was so easy to use, and it almost always translated into a very easy kill. But over time, Bungie kind of nerfed the Plan C and fusion rifles in general because people were kind of getting annoyed by them a little bit, though no one was really getting annoyed by how generous sniping was. I don't know. Not that many people were doing it. I think that's one of the things that people don't understand is very early on in Destiny, people really didn't know what they were doing per se. In the beta alpha, it was very common to see people saying the hunters were the best, and it was because of the fact that they had the golden gun, which was a roaming super, whereas nowadays roaming supers aren't really that dominant compared to, Stormcaller, which is probably the best roaming super currently in the game. But back in the day, it was very much so golden gun. It's a very easy to use, very straightforward super, one shot, one kill, very simply got 3 shots, and it was an amazing super. And I think Hunters dominated Crucible for that very reason, because they had 2 roaming supers and they were very powerful. In the early days of Destiny's launch, Blade Dancer was extremely powerful, and this is even before you start seeing everyone blink. Blade Dancers had so much armor, like when they were just dashing around slashing you, it was really hard to deal with them because they just had so much health. But of course, eventually Bungie nerfed that and they put Blade Dancers more in line with everyone else's health, so you could actually shut them down. But early on, Blade Dancers were very much a pain, and this is when Blade Dancers were predominantly just double jumping around, but they had so much armor, it was really hard to combat them. But like I said, this was the early on shape of Destiny PvP. As you can see, auto rifles packed quite a bit of punch. Personally, I had a lot of fun during this era because I think that's when everyone was playing, everyone was excited about Destiny, everyone had all these good vibes and feelings from the beta alpha, and then you got into the final game, and to be honest, I kind of knew that it wasn't going to be how it was going to be in the final game because we just got so few things in the beta alpha. Yes, it was very fun, very crisp, but that was because there's so few things in the game. It was just so easy to balance, nothing was absurd. I knew when the game finally launched we were getting legendaries, we were getting blues, we were going to get exotics, and we really had no idea how this would pan out. When you add more variables into a game, it's going to be more things the developer has to balance. So yes, the alpha beta was very fun, felt very balanced, but that was mainly because we had a small tool set. We only got to play with one of the subclasses of each. You got the Striker for the beta, you got the Golden Gun for the Hunter, and you got the Nova Bomb for the Warlock. That's literally all you got in the beta. And of course in the final game we got Sunsinger, we got Blade Dancer, and we got the Titan Bubble, which really didn't shape Destiny PvP all that much because outside of popping them on flags every now and then to control, but outside of that we didn't really get a good idea of just how much crap there was really going to be in Destiny, and I very much so knew that. So I went into Destiny, the full game, very much so a little bit worried because I knew once the floodgates were open with all these weapons, I knew Bungie was gonna need to effectively balance all these weapons, and I kind of had my doubts that they would. But I mean, like I said, it was a very fun time. Everyone was having a blast with Destiny. They thought it was fantastic. The beta went over very well. It was one of the most downloaded betas ever, I believe. A lot of people played the beta, and a lot of people bought the game at launch. But of course, once people got the game at launch and people started seeing all the absurdities, like Blade Dancer just being impossible to kill, people running around golden gunning and generating 50 orbs and just a train of golden guns over and over again, everyone getting obliterated by the Suros because they didn't have one, and just you couldn't really compete unless you had the Suros. And then you had the Vex, which if you ran into someone with the Vex, you might as well just run away from them each time because there's no hope of dealing with that Vex mythical. Even a Suros could not beat a Vex during its prime. The Vex was literally unbeatable in every situation. It was truly horrifying. But like I said, it was very fun. Everyone was playing. It was a new IP. A lot of good things were going on. I know a lot of people were disappointed with the story, but in terms of Crucible, it was a very healthy environment. I'm not really going to comment on the skill-based matchmaking and how it was kind of introduced later on in Destiny's lifespan because I kind of already have an opinion on skill-based matchmaking, and this video isn't really going to be discussing skill-based matchmaking. But like I said, a lot of people were playing Destiny Crucible PvP. It was a good time. It was easy to find a match. And it was just a lot of fun to play pubs. But then, of course, we move on to what would become the most notorious era of Destiny's PvP, which was kind of the introduction of the Dark Below, House of Wolves, kind of the hand cannon era, if you will. Now, a lot of people will tell you that very early on in Destiny's game, hand cannons were completely unusable. In the beta alpha, no one was using hand cannon. Unless you wanted to go negative every match, you were not using a hand cannon because they shot so slow and they just could not compete with auto rifles or even a scout whatsoever. Hand cannons just had no home or place in Destiny Crucible, it seemed. But of course, people complained about this. People wanted to see hand cannons more in the Crucible space. And then we started seeing things like the Thorn being buffed, and people got their hands on, of course, the Last Word. And of course, if you were on the PlayStation, you got the exclusive Hawkmoon. And the hand cannon area was very notorious because it kind of comes synonymous with two-tapping, because literally all these hand cannons had the potential to two-tap you. With Thorn, if you got 2 headshots, that was it. And you just burned them out. You didn't even have to look at the target anymore. That was it. The Last Word was extremely notorious for just 111ing people across the map because of the hipfire bonus damage and the little glitch that people would often do, which I employed quite a bit as well. It was just a horrifying weapon. How much damage the Last Word could do, considering how quickly it shot. I mean, Destiny turned into a Twitch shooter, and to be honest, if you look at the damage during the early game, yes, you were getting like 49 to the head crit wise with an auto rifle that had like focus fire, one of those higher impact ones, which pretty much everyone was using. But if you watch some of the hand cannon gameplay, which we will have shown up in this video in a second, you will see that like the Hawkmoon had the potential to hit at I want to say 126 with those Luck in the Chambers. You were hitting 126 to the head. The Last Word was hitting 111 to the head, and then the Thorn was hitting like probably around the same ballpark of 93, 94, plus the 7 burn tick damage. So we're talking a lot of damage very quickly, and that's kind of why hand cannons rose to the top, mainly the exotic ones, because they're just the amount of damage they could do in a short span of time was truly horrifying. And at that point, Destiny, in my opinion, just turned into a Twitch-based shooter. And I know a lot of people were like, oh, well, at least the hand cannon era, people use primaries. Yeah, they use primaries, all right, but that's because primaries were literally on a different level. And it's not to say that all the primaries were like that. I mean, during that time, I was using the Mida quite a bit as well before everyone started using the Mida. And I felt like the Mida was the perfect balance of a very good weapon, but nothing disgusting. Whereas the Thorn and the Last Word and the Hawkmoon, they were literally disgusting. Yes, people were using their primaries or whatever, but these primaries, in particular these 3, were just out of control deadly. I mean, I never played Destiny and imagined it to be a game where you were going to 2-tap people left and right, but that's essentially what Destiny turned into when the hand cannon era, when the Dark Below started creeping in, House of Wolves, it was in full force. People were complaining about Trials of just being Thorn and Last Word, and that's literally all it was for a very long time. And like I said, it was nice to see pretty much everyone using their primary, but at the same time, I knew these 3 primaries in particular that everyone had access to very easily were just out of control. I mean, literally the Hawkmoon, those who didn't get to play with it at its prime, could one-shot people, and I don't think it's okay that you play a game where a primary weapon can literally one-shot. I mean, even in Call of Duty, unless we're talking about a sniper rifle, nothing's gonna one-shot you. No, like MP5 or any one gun. I mean, right now there's a lot of frustration with the M16 one-bursting you all the time in Modern Warfare Remastered, but there was no gun that could literally one-shot you, but the Hawkmoon could. So, I mean, a lot of people have a lot of fun memories with the hand cannon era, but to me, like I said, I did have fun. People were still playing the game, but the time to kill during this time was just on a different level of just vomit-inducing for me. It was just absurd how these 3 exotic weapons were just obliterating people in Crucible. And if you weren't using these guns, you were pretty much screwed. But that being said, pretty much everyone had access to the Thorn. Xur sold the Last Word multiple times. Now, Hawkmoon was a little bit trickier to get because it was a PlayStation exclusive, so I don't think Xur really ever sold it. And essentially, it was only accessible to us PlayStation users. But for those who did get to wield it in its unnerved state, the ability to one-shot a Guardian with a hand cannon with a primary weapon was huge. And in my opinion, a little bit overkill, but it was a very fun weapon to use if you had the Hawkmoon. And I very much so enjoyed that weapon, but I could clearly see this. I don't think being able to one-shot someone with the hand cannon, regardless if it was to the head, was okay. But eventually it got put in its place, and more often than not, you were two-tapping people. But still, being able to two-tap someone with their weapon consistently, I really wasn't okay with that. We are literally talking about a time when primary weapons, the Last Word, the Hawkmoon, the Thorn, could all easily beat out heavy weapons. They could easily beat them a heavy machine gun. They could easily trade with rocket launchers. That was just no. And in terms of special weapons, starting with snipers, there was a very small but very exciting era of snipers. If you saw this gameplay footage, you saw me shoot at a crate. And for those who don't remember, there was a fun little thing called armor-piercing rounds that kind of slowly creeped its way into the meta. And this was mainly due to the fact that the vendor in the Dark Below started selling a weapon called the LDR 5001, I believe it's called, something like that. But this sniper had a very interesting perk called armor-piercing rounds, and when people messed around with it, they very quickly realized that these snipers had the potential to purely wallbang people. And we're talking not just through like boxes and crates, we're talking straight through buildings. You could see gameplay back in the day when you saw people literally shooting through like fire-based stealthy, the outside shooting straight into B-flag and getting snipes. This is how absurd wall banging, which for those who aren't familiar with wall banging, it's kind of a term that the Call of Duty community uses because you can kind of shoot people through a wall in that game. But in Destiny, when armor-piercing rounds was a thing, there was no reduction of damage when the sniper bullet was going through walls. So basically, you were doing full damage with the sniper hit through walls, and that kind of led to some very infuriating matches, especially in Control, because people were basically hard scoping, pre-firing through buildings just to get basically hit scans through you while you're on the objective. So that was a little absurd. Eventually, Bungie kind of got rid of that entirely. You weren't really seeing people wallbang people with snipers anymore. You could kind of still use armor-piercing rounds through like very thin objects, but it didn't become as viable as it used to be because, rightfully so, I mean, I did not want Destiny to be a game where you could literally wallbang people with anything, primaries or sniper rifles, but Bungie did get on top of that very quickly, which, you know, good on them for that, because it was kind of a little bit vomit-inducing seeing people literally shooting through buildings and getting kills with snipers. It was just too much in my opinion. By this time, fusion rifles were kind of just, they kind of went the way of the dodo bird. You don't really see them anymore because Pocket Infinity was essentially dead and Plan C was some of the stronger archetypes with the high impact. You'd still see those fusion rifles, but outside of that, no one was really using fusion rifles. One of the big things that came out during the hand cannon era was the introduction of the high impact, low rate of fire shotguns. As I previously mentioned, you saw a lot of found verdicts more often than not because it was a very easy shotgun to use. You just held down the triggers full auto and it sprayed. But during this time, you started seeing people very quickly learn about the magic that was shot package. Now, shot package was basically rangefinder, but much better because it basically tightened the spread of the shotgun pellets. So it was just going exactly where you're hitting. And this led to a lot of people getting mapped with these shotguns. And in a sense, they were not shotguns anymore. They were literally sniping people at ranges. And to be honest, it was a bit much, but a lot of the issues I feel like with shotguns were the fact that the map design. The map design in Destiny has always been very close quarters favor, with the exception of a few maps like First Light, Bastion. Then you have Rusted Lands and Shores of Time. And maybe you could argue Pantheon, which actually have some lines of sight for sniping. But outside of that, most of these maps are very close quarters, indoor maps. And this kind of just favors the nature of shotguns. So, yes, shot package was quite a bit much and absurd. But for the most part, I feel like the map design, as you can see nowadays, we don't really have shot package. But you're still seeing people running around shotgunning people left and right, and that's just because the maps kind of are designed for it. They just strongly favor people using shotguns. So, I mean, yes, this era of shotguns still continues to this day. You're still seeing the Matadors and the Party Crashers left and right, and some people are still using Felwinchers for those who haven't gotten the new shotguns, the new updated damage shotguns to drop. But like I said, shotguns have been with us since even early Destiny when the Found Verdict was around. In the beta alpha, they were still very viable weapons, but like I said, shotguns have been around since Destiny's inception, but I think a lot of people felt the pain very, very much so during the House of Wolves era when kind of the essence of Trials became Thorn shotgun. Another thing that very much emerged from this kind of hand cannon era during the Dark Below House of Wolves was Blink. Blink was a very interesting ability because nowadays you don't really see people using Blink anymore, but Blink during this time was just on a different level. This movement system pretty much changed Crucible to where everyone had to blink, and this kind of cemented the place of how powerful hunters were because they had Blade Dancer, which was a very hard to keep track of, super very quick, and when you had a kill with someone, you instantly regenerate your health. So granted, you didn't have the armor you did during the game's early launch, but Blink was just on a different level of lethality. If you could not blink, you were not competing during this time. That's pretty much what cemented the hunter dominance. I mean, early on in the game, hunters were very dominant because of Golden Gun, but once Blink kicked in, it was pretty much just blinking, quick draw, blade dancing left and right. You saw Warlocks show up a little bit, but for the most part, it was a hunter dominant game all the way up to Taken King. Hunters were the dominant Crucible class. And then we get into Taken King. And by this time, people were very much so fed up with getting 2-tapped by the Thorn, the Last Word, and the Hawk Moon, and such and such. So by this time, Bungie introduced a couple of core changes which are still being felt to this day, which I do not agree with whatsoever. One of the first things they introduced was Bloom. Now, for those who don't know what Bloom is essentially kind of an effect with the reticle. When you shoot, that kind of spreads out, thus making it a little bit more tricky to hit shots, more inaccurate. And this was introduced before in other FPSs, and it's never gone over well, so I have no idea why Bungie thought it would be a great idea to introduce a Bloom into Destiny, since it never went well in any other game, and it didn't go well in this game. And we still have Bloom to this day, and I very much so wish Bungie would get rid of it, but it was introduced during Taken King in a sense. Another thing they introduced that I thought was actually a smart move was damage fall-off. Damage fall-offs actually made sense. There should be damage fall-off in just shooters in general. Not so much bullet drop off. That's kind of more of a thing in Battlefield where bullets actually kind of start dropping over distance of time. This is a sci-fi shooter. That shouldn't be in the game, but damage fall off with weapons makes perfect sense. It kind of put hand cannons a little bit more in their place, so you weren't literally getting the full damage at cross map with the hand cannon, which just didn't make sense in general. Now, this combination of Bloom and damage fall off kind of led to the very brief fall off, if you will, of hand cannons. It was very brief, that in conjunction with the fact that Bungie was like, hey, let's buff up pulse rifles, since prior to Taken King, pulse rifles have never really had their time to shine in Crucible. And once they buffed them up, you were seeing a lot of people use the pulse rifle from Year 1 Trials of Osiris and Red Death. Basically, the high impact, low rate of fire pulse rifles, Hopscotch Pilgrim, those were the ones that kind of took over Crucible for just a little bit. And of course, over time, people were getting sick of getting 2-tapped, even though I always hated when people said, oh, I'm getting 2-tapped by pulse rifles. It always irked me because when I think of getting 2-tapped, I think of the hand cannons that were literally 2-tapping you with 2 bullets, whereas pulse rifles, you're getting hit by 6 bullets. If you're getting 2 bursted, those are 6 bullets, 3 bullets for each burst. And I felt like that was pretty healthy, and more often than not, you were getting 3 bursted because not everyone could consistently land like perfect 2 bursts straight to the head. That wasn't really happening that often. A lot of times people were getting 3 bursted, but regardless, the community got a little bit sick of that. The high-impact pulse rifles kind of got nerfed a little bit. And, of course, the Hawksaw kind of took over, which the Hawksaw is kind of the middle ground between the Grasp of Malak, Clover Dragon, we all know and love to this day, and the high-impact, low rate of fire pulse rifles like the Red Death and the Hopscotch Pilgrim. And, of course, there was kind of small mini-meta era where people realized the Doctrine of Passing, or in general, high rate of fire, low-impact auto rifles were extremely lethal in the Crucible. And people got on that train for a little bit before Bungie kind of shut that down. And of course, there was this thing going on where the Mida multi-tool was a very, very good weapon. I mean, even before Taken King, before it was brought up to the Year 2 light level, it was a very strong weapon. I always loved being able to dance back and forth, strafe left and right, because in general, you should always be strafing in first-person shooters. But the special thing about Mida to me was the fact that it literally made you strafe back and forth a lot faster than any other primary in the game, and it felt so crispy, so smooth. But the one thing people very quickly gravitated for in the Mida was the fact that the Mida, kind of like how the Gallahorn super secret low-key has proximity detonation on it, the Mida had high caliber rounds on it, and obviously doesn't say anywhere on the skill tree. And that's something we are all very well acquainted with now, because everyone's rocking that high caliber Clever Dragon, which I feel like the Clever Dragon and the Mida share a couple of major things. They're both excellent weapons, perform very well, very consistent, but they're both, I don't feel like they're overpowered. The main reason the Mida was frustrating was because it had high caliber rounds, and I feel like the main reason the Clever Dragon is frustrating people right now is because everyone's just using the high caliber variant. And if you don't have high cal on your Clever Dragon, you're pretty much losing to anyone who does have high cal on their Clever Dragon. It's just, what High Caliber does, it adds a crazy amount of flinch to anyone who's getting shot at. And granted, there's always been flinch in Destiny, and of course they added a little bit more flinch to snipers because everyone was sniping left and right, because everyone had easy access to the 1,000-yard stare, or as most people jokingly called it, the 1,000-yard aim assist. And they added more flinch to the snipers when scoped in, which I felt like made more sense. And of course they reduced aim assist, which I felt like that was completely fine as well. I didn't really have too many issues with the adjustments to snipers, but the fact that high caliber rounds has kind of become one of the key factors in winning gunfights now, it really irks me, and I'm really worried that instead of taking the smart route like we did with the Mida and realize, hey, this weapon actually isn't overpowered, it's just the fact that it has high caliber, that's kind of what made the Mida a little bit over the top. Just remove high cal from Clever Dragons, replace it with something else, because that's what I feel like is making the Clever Dragon just too strong, just too obnoxious to deal with, because you're getting shot by that thing and you're just flinching like crazy. So hopefully Bungie just simply removes high cal from the Clever Dragon and just leaves it as it is, because that would put the PvP primary meta to a state where you can use IS Luna Palindrome, that's fine. You can use the Grasp of Malik and the Clever Dragon since they're very lethal primaries, and you can use the Midas since the Midas still holds up. But just please do not make the mistake, Bungie, of misinterpreting the fact that the Clever Dragon is overpowered. It's just the fact that in combination with the high caliber rounds, kind of like with the high caliber rounds of the Mida, that's what makes it really obnoxious and a very common choice in the Crucible right now. In terms of special weapons, I know a lot of people are complaining about people using shotguns, but that kind of just has to do with the fact that over the past 2-3-ish years at this point, Bungie has continually added more and more maps that consistently kind of cater to people using shotguns. You don't really see a lot of maps in the style of Rusted Lands and Shores of Time and First Light. All the DLC they keep adding just kind of reinforces this idea of, hey, look at this close quarters map. You kind of be a fool to not shotgun at this point, because Bungie's map design continually is telling players to use shotguns, and it's very easy to push people these days with just how weak primaries are. The only really good primaries out there is kind of Last Word, which is a little inconsistent, IS Luna, Palindrome, the high rate of fire pulse rifles. Everything else is kind of just not capable of dealing with people pushing you with shotguns. And there's a lot of options nowadays to push people in terms of movement with subclasses. In Taken King, they introduced 3 new subclasses for the Titan, Hunter, and Warlock. The Titan got the unholy Hammer of Soul, which was literally a fusion of Golden Gun, Nova Bomb, and Blade Dancer all rolled into one unstoppable class. And for a while, the Titans had a good tear. They were literally unstoppable for about, I want to say about roughly 2-ish months. You could not beat a full party of Hammer of Soul Titans. It was literally on such a different level compared to all the other subclasses in terms of its super and its abilities. They're just horrifying. Like, if you ran into a party of Hammer of Souls, you were going to lose. If there's 2 or 3 Titans on the other team and you didn't have at least one Hammer of Soul, you were pretty much screwed. They had so much armor, and their Hammer of Soul explosion radius was literally the size of a Nova Bomb. It was just absurd, but Bungie did take care of it. They nerfed it a little bit too hard, but, nowadays they buffed it back up. So Hammer of Soul is in a little bit more reasonable place nowadays. They also introduced in Taken King Stormcaller, which is very notorious these days for having the ability to melee you across map. It's truly horrifying, the melee range of the Stormcaller, and I do feel like that needs to be looked at, because it's a bit much. I know it's part of its skill tree, but it makes them unbeatable in close range combat. I don't even want to say close range. At mid range combat, they are unbeatable, just because at mid range they can literally melee you. So they can just punch you mid range and shoot you a couple times. It's over. That's the level of power that a Stormcaller has in terms of mid to close ranges. They're just unable to contest them. They also added Night Stalker, which the super leaves a little to be desired in Crucible. It's honestly a fairly weak super, but they have amazing abilities like shade stepping and smoke bombs, and their nades are fantastic for zoning people out. But in general, Hunters are nowhere near as prominent in Crucible as they used to be, because they ruled the roost in Crucible for a very long time, but they've received so many nerfs from their subclasses, from Blade Dancers and Blink, to the very jarring nerfs from Throwing Knives, which I'm just like, why? No one was like, oh man, those throwing knives, they're totally out of control. And then they nerfed sticking people with trip mines, which truly baffled me, because the one nade that could stick on people and actually took skill, which is unlike fusion nades, which literally like curved around corners, like we're talking some crazy stickiness, magnetism to it. You'd be around the corner and you just see this fusion nade curve around the corner and somehow stick you. Yeah, that never happened with trip mines. Trip mines had zero magnetism or stickiness to them. If someone stuck at the trip mine, that was a perfectly thrown stick. It was all skill, all aim, no magnetism or stickiness to it. Bungie's like, nope, we're not having trip mines stick you anymore. And that, I don't get it. But I've rambled long enough about the various changes from Destiny's Crucible. And hopefully Bungie makes some appropriate changes in the near future with Destiny 1. And hopefully Destiny 1 was a big learning experience for them and they make the appropriate changes in Destiny 2. Because I'm not sure how much more they can do with Destiny 1 at this point. We're kind of wrapping it up here. I'm sorry this video lasted God knows how long, but I had a lot to say. And to be honest, I still have more to say. But that's enough for this video. I'll leave you with the classic screen from the alpha when I first played Destiny 1. Hope you guys enjoyed this lengthy video, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.